In January 1944, three of Germany's highest-scoring fighter aces gathered at Rechlin to fly a captured P-38J Lightning, not because they wanted to understand its specifications, but because they were desperate to understand why they kept losing combat engagements they thought they had won. These men had collectively shot down over 400 Allied aircraft using tactics perfected over 3 years of combat, yet American P-38 pilots were escaping from what should have been killing positions, disengaging from disadvantaged situations and refusing to fight on German terms. What these aces discovered during their evaluation flights would force them to confront a devastating truth. The air war had fundamentally changed from a contest of pilot skill and aircraft maneuverability to a contest of energy management and aircraft performance, and the P-38's ability to accelerate in a dive, zoom climb after attacks, and maintain speed advantage at altitude meant that tactical brilliance no longer mattered when the enemy could simply choose not to fight. This is the story of how experienced combat pilots learned that their hard-won expertise was being nullified by American engineering, and how the reports they wrote traveled through a command structure that couldn't accept that victory was no longer possible through superior tactics alone. Subscribe now for the untold tactical stories of World War II's air war, where the battles weren't just about who had the best aircraft, but about how superior performance in specific flight regimes could render decades of tactical doctrine obsolete. We're bringing you combat pilot perspectives you won't find anywhere else. Hit subscribe. January 8, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Mecklenburg, Germany. The morning is brutally cold. Winter locked over northern Germany with temperatures 15 degrees below freezing. The sky clear and pale blue, wind still. Major Gunther Raoul stands beside the runway, arms crossed tightly against his body for warmth, his breath visible in clouds, staring at the P-38J Lightning that sits on the frozen concrete like an accusation. The twin-boom fighter is painted in American olive drab over neutral gray, the white star insignia on the fuselage partially obscured by German kill markings, 3 small crosses painted near the cockpit by the recovery team, a grim joke about the aircraft now serving Germany. Raoul is 26 years old, one of the Luftwaffe's most successful fighter pilots with 201 confirmed victories, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, and a man who has fought on every front. He has shot down Hurricanes, Spitfires, LAGG-3 South, Yak-9 South, P-39 Airacobras, and P-40 Warhawks. He has mastered every tactical situation, every combat geometry, every psychological nuance of aerial combat. And for the past 6 months, he has been consistently frustrated by American P-38 Lightning pilots who refuse to die when they should. The frustration is specific and maddening. 3 weeks ago, over southern Germany, Raoul bounced a formation of 4 P-38s escorting B-17 bombers. He dove from 28,000 feet with his swarm of 4 Bf-109 G6s, achieving perfect positioning, high 6 o'clock, sun behind them, speed advantage from the dive. The P-38s saw them coming. American pilots in 1944 are well-trained, vigilant, experienced, and reacted by pushing forward on their control sticks and diving. Raoul followed, certain he could close the distance, certain his dive speed would allow him to achieve firing position. At 25,000 feet, the P-38s were pulling away. At 20,000 feet, they were gone, accelerating in their dive faster than the Bf-109s could follow, opening range effortlessly. Raoul pulled out at 15,000 feet, his engines screaming, his airframe buffeting from speed stress, having fired not a single shot. The P-38s leveled at 10,000 feet, reformed, and climbed back to altitude. By the time Raoul regained his altitude, they were back with the bombers. He had achieved perfect tactical position, executed a perfect bounce, and accomplished nothing. The P-38s had simply outrun him. This pattern has repeated itself throughout the autumn and winter of 1943, 1944. German fighters bounce P-38s from advantageous positions. P-38s dive away. German fighters cannot match their dive acceleration or sustained high-speed performance. The P-38s escape, reset, continue their missions. German pilots are left frustrated, burning fuel, having expended altitude advantage for 0 results. Traditional fighter tactics, gain altitude, achieve position, dive to attack, work perfectly until the moment of attack, when American pilots employ a counter-tactic German doctrine has no answer for. They simply leave. They don't turn to fight, don't attempt evasive maneuvers, don't panic. They push forward on the stick, accelerate to speeds German fighters cannot match, and disappear. It is tactically sound, professionally executed, and infuriating. Raoul has come to Rechlin because he needs to understand what the P-38 can do that his Bf-109 cannot, and more importantly, how to counter it. Behind Raoul, two other pilots wait in the January cold, both men whose reputations precede them. Hauptmann Helmut Lipfert, 26 years old, with 203 confirmed victories, most achieved on the Eastern Front flying Bf 109s. And Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, 27 years old, with 28 confirmed victories, including several four-engine bombers, recently transferred from bomber interception duties on the Western Front. 3 aces, 432 combined victories, centuries of accumulated combat experience. Gathered to fly one enemy aircraft because that aircraft is beating them using tactics they cannot counter. The P-38 was captured in late December when an aircraft from the 55th Fighter Group suffered hydraulic failure and force-landed near Frankfurt. The pilot attempted to destroy his aircraft with thermite grenades but was interrupted by German troops before completing the job. The aircraft was repairable. Luftwaffe mechanics spent 2 weeks making it airworthy, working from captured technical manuals and improvising what manuals didn't explain. The result sits before them now, a flyable P-38J, fully armed, fueled, ready to reveal its secrets to pilots who desperately need to understand why their expertise is becoming irrelevant. Raoul approaches the P-38 slowly, walking around it with a combat pilot's eye rather than an engineer's curiosity. He's not here to admire American manufacturing or evaluate technical specifications. He is here to answer a tactical question. Why can't I kill these aircraft? The P-38 is large, far larger than any single-engine fighter he has flown. The wingspan is 52 feet compared to the Bf 109g's 32 feet. The fuselage, if you can call the central nacelle that is thick, housing the cockpit, armament, and nose gear. The twin booms extend rearward from the engines, each boom supporting half the tail assembly. The configuration is ungainly, almost comical, looking more like 2 aircraft welded together than a purpose-designed fighter, but Raoul knows appearance means nothing. He has seen these aircraft in combat. They are fast, especially at altitude and in dives. They are heavily armed 4.50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon, all concentrated in the nose. No convergence issues, point-and-shoot lethality. They have excellent range, allowing them to escort bombers deep into Germany where Bf 109s struggle with fuel reserves. And most frustratingly, they can escape from any engagement whenever they choose. That last capability is what Raoul needs to understand. He climbs into the cockpit using the entry ladder on the left side of the nose. The cockpit is spacious compared to a Bf 109 with room to move, good visibility through the large canopy panels, and a comfortable seat with thick padding. American pilots, Raoul thinks, are comfortable. German pilots are functional. The instrument panel is comprehensive but logically organized. Airspeed, altimeter, engine instruments duplicated for left and right engines. Manifold pressure gauges, fuel quantity, hydraulic pressure. The throttle quadrant features separate controls for left and right engines. A complexity German single-engine pilots don't face, along with propeller pitch controls, mixture controls, intercooler shutters. Managing 2 engines requires discipline and attention. The control wheel is aviation standard, similar to German aircraft. The rudder pedals are conventional. He positions his hands on the controls, familiarizing himself with their layout, thinking through the startup sequence explained by the German mechanics who have studied the aircraft. Raoul signals readiness. External power is connected. He follows the checklist: batteries on, fuel pumps on for both engines. Mixtures rich, propellers full forward, throttles cracked open 1 inch each. He switches magnetos to both for the right engine, then presses the starter. The Allison V1710 cranks, catches, settles into a rough idle. He repeats the process for the left engine. Within seconds, both engines are running, the dual exhaust creating a complex sound unlike the single-engine roar he knows intimately. The most striking characteristic: no torque. The propellers counter-rotate, left engine clockwise, right engine counterclockwise, canceling each other's torque effects completely. Taking off in a Bf 109 requires constant right rudder to counteract left-turning tendency. The P-38 flies straight with neutral rudder. Raoul recognizes immediately that this seemingly minor detail has tactical implications. Takeoffs are easier, less demanding, allowing less experienced pilots to operate safely. Energy management in combat is simpler without torque effects complicating every maneuver. The Americans have engineered away a problem German pilots must constantly manage. He taxis to the runway, the P-38's tricycle landing gear providing excellent forward visibility compared to tail draggers that require his sterning to see ahead. Another small advantage: easier ground handling, faster reaction to unexpected situations during taxi. At the runway threshold, he runs final checks, then advances both throttles to take off power. The acceleration is impressive: 2,900 horsepower from 2 engines compared to 1,475 horsepower from his Bf 109's single engine. The P-38 accelerates rapidly despite weighing nearly double. At 90 miles per hour, the nose wheel lifts. At 120 miles per hour, he rotates smoothly, and the P-38 climbs away powerfully. No swing, no torque, just straight climbing acceleration. He retracts the gear, notes the climb rate, 3,500 feet per minute at sea level. His Bf-109 G6 climbs at 3,100 feet per minute. The P-38, despite its size, nearly matches his climb rate while carrying more fuel, more ammunition, more capability. He climbs to 15,000 feet and begins the evaluation that will change how he thinks about aerial combat. Level at 15,000 feet, Raoul advances the throttles to military power, the maximum continuous power setting Americans use for sustained operations. The turbocharged Allisons respond with smooth power increase, the manifold pressure holding steady as the turbochargers maintain sea-level pressure to the engines despite the altitude. The P-38 accelerates 250 miles per hour, 300, 350, 380, 400. The airspeed stabilizes at 410 miles per hour. His Bf-109 G6 at 15,000 feet achieves maximum speed of 387 miles per hour, and that's at maximum power with the engine at redline limits. The P-38 is cruising 23 miles per hour faster at sustainable power settings. He climbs to 20,000 feet, repeats the test. 414 miles per hour at military power. His Bf-109 at this altitude maxes at 398 miles per hour. The gap has widened to 16 miles per hour, and the American aircraft is still at military power, not maximum. He climbs to 25,000 feet, 418 miles per hour. At this altitude, where much of the air war over Germany occurs, the P-38 is definitively faster than any German piston engine fighter in service. The Me-109K4, Germany's latest variant, achieves 410 miles per hour at 25,000 feet close, but still slower, and the K4 is only beginning to enter service in small numbers. But Raoul knows speed numbers don't fully explain his combat frustrations. He needs to test what matters in actual engagements: acceleration, energy retention, dive performance, zoom climb capability. He sets up a test sequence simulating a typical combat scenario, starting from level flight at 25,000 feet at 300 miles per hour. Patrol speed, he advances throttles to war emergency power and pushes forward into a 30-degree dive, simulating an attack run. The P-38 accelerates with shocking rapidity. Within 10 seconds, he has reached 400 miles per hour. Within 20 seconds, 450 miles per hour. Within 30 seconds, 480 miles per hour. The acceleration in a dive is far superior to his Bf-109, which would take 40 to 50 seconds to reach similar speeds. More importantly, the P-38 remains perfectly stable throughout. The controls responsive, no buffeting, no tendency to tuck under or pull out uncommanded. He pulls out of the dive at 15,000 feet, maintaining 450 miles per hour, then pulls up into a zoom climb. The P-38 converts speed to altitude with remarkable efficiency, climbing 6,000 feet before speed decays to 200 miles per hour. He has traded 10,000 feet of altitude and gained back 6,000 feet, finishing at 21,000 feet and 4,000 feet below his starting altitude, but having covered horizontal distance and simulated an attack. A Bf-109 performing the same maneuver would finish at 18,000 to 19,000 feet, losing 6,000 to 7,000 feet net. The difference is energy retention. The P-38's heavier mass, once accelerated, resists deceleration, maintaining speed through maneuvers, converting that speed efficiently to altitude. Raoul suddenly understands his combat frustrations with crystal clarity. When he dives on P-38s, they push into steeper dives and accelerate faster than he can follow. When he pulls out to reset the engagement, they zoom climb back to altitude faster than he can. They start and end each engagement with energy advantage he cannot overcome. His tactical positioning, his careful altitude management, his patient waiting for the perfect bounce, all of it is negated by simple physics. The P-38 accelerates better, dives faster, climbs more efficiently, maintains speed longer. The American pilot doesn't need tactical brilliance. He just needs to understand his aircraft's energy advantages and use them. Push forward to accelerate, dive to escape or attack, zoom climb to reset. Simple, repeatable, almost mechanical. And Raoul, despite being one of Germany's most skilled pilots with 201 victories, cannot counter it in a Bf-109 because the Bf-109 cannot perform these maneuvers as effectively. He conducts one final test, the most revealing. He climbs to 25,000 feet, reduces speed to 250 miles per hour, simulating a P-38 that has been caught slow during an engagement, and initiates a turning fight, the maneuver where Bf-109s excel and where P-38s are supposedly vulnerable. He rolls into a 60-degree bank and pulls, establishing a maximum rate turn. The P-38 turns adequately. Not quickly, not impressively, but adequately. The controls are heavy, requiring significant force, the turn rate clearly inferior to a Bf 109. In a sustained turning fight, the German fighter would gain angles, achieve firing position, win the engagement. But Raoul realizes the critical point: the P-38 pilot would never allow a sustained turning fight to develop. After one turn, recognizing disadvantage, the American pilot would simply roll wings level, push forward, and accelerate away using the speed advantage Raoul has just demonstrated. The German pilot would follow into the dive, fall behind due to inferior dive acceleration, watch the P-38 escape. The turning advantage is tactically irrelevant if the enemy can disengage at will. After 90 minutes of intensive flying, testing every performance regime and tactical maneuver he can conceive, Raoul returns to Rechlin. The landing is straightforward, the tricycle gear making touchdown and rollout simple. He taxis to the apron, shuts down both engines simultaneously, and sits in the cockpit for several minutes, processing what he has learned. The P-38 is not a better dogfighter than the Bf 109. In turning combat, the German fighter would win. But the P-38 never has to dogfight. It can engage when it chooses, disengage when it chooses, dictate the terms of every engagement through superior speed and energy management. The American pilot controls the battle. The German pilot can only react. Raoul climbs down from the cockpit, his expression grim. Lipford is waiting, asking what he found. Raoul says simply, "Everything the combat reports say is true. We cannot force these aircraft to fight if they don't want to. Our tactics are obsolete." Lipford flies next, bringing a different perspective. Where Raoul is analytical and methodical, Lipford is aggressive and intuitive, a pilot who fights by instinct honed through 203 victories. He takes off, climbs to altitude, and immediately begins aggressive maneuvering, testing the P-38's limits in ways that simulate actual combat stress rather than controlled test conditions. He performs high G-barrel rolls, discovering that the P-38's roll rate is mediocre, significantly slower than the Bf 109's exceptional roll performance. He performs snap rolls, discovering the P-38 resists and recovers slowly. He performs scissors maneuvers, discovering the P-38's heavy controls make rapid reversals difficult. In every pure maneuverability test, the Bf 109 is superior. Lipford should feel encouraged. Instead, he feels frustrated, because he recognizes these advantages are meaningless in actual combat against P-38s. He simulates an engagement where he has achieved perfect position, high 6 o'clock speed advantage, target in his sights. At the moment he would fire, the target P-38 simulated, since he is alone, would recognize the threat and react. Push forward, dive, accelerate. Lipford follows, diving after the target, but within 15 seconds the target is accelerating away, pulling out of range, escaping. He tries multiple variations, starting closer, starting with more speed advantage, starting from different angles. Every scenario ends the same way. The P-38 escapes using dive speed advantage. Lipford lands frustrated and angry, not at the aircraft, but at the reality it represents. He tells Raoul, "I can outturn it, outroll it, outmaneuver it in every pure flying comparison. And none of that matters because the P-38 pilot won't engage in pure flying combat. He'll dive away and I can't follow. All my skills, all my experience are useless if I can't make the enemy fight on my terms." The Americans have found a way to neutralize German tactical advantages through aircraft performance. That's not fair, but it works. Stigler flies third, approaching the evaluation from yet another angle. He is a bomber killer, experienced at attacking four-engine bombers with their formations and defensive firepower. He knows about engaging targets that don't maneuver, that maintain course, that can be approached using geometry and patience. He climbs the P-38 to 28,000 feet, the altitude where B-17 formations typically fly, and conducts high-altitude handling tests. The P-38 performs beautifully at altitude, the turbocharged engines maintaining power where German fighters struggle. He performs mock attacks on imaginary bomber formations. Discovering the P-38's nose-mounted armament provides perfect accuracy. All guns converge at the aircraft's center line, eliminating the convergence calculations required with wing-mounted guns. Point the nose at the target, fire hits are certain. He understands why P-38s are effective bomber escorts. They fly at bomber altitude without strain. They have the range to escort all the way to targets. They have the speed to intercept attacking German fighters. And they have the firepower to destroy attackers quickly. But Stigler's most important discovery is tactical, not technical. He simulates being a German fighter attacking a bomber formation. He dives from 30,000 feet, accelerating to attack speed, approaching the formation from high 6 o'clock, the classic German attack approach. As he closes, he imagines P-38 escorts reacting. Some turn toward him to intercept, forcing him to evade, breaking his attack. Others dive with him, matching his speed, positioning to fire. His Bf 109 in this situation would be faster in the dive initially, but as the dive continues, The P-38s would catch up, their dive acceleration matching his. If he damages a bomber and tries to escape, the P-38s can follow him down, matching his dive speed, staying in firing range. Previously, German fighters could attack bombers, then dive away faster than most escorts could follow. P-47s changed that equation somewhat. P-38s completely changed it. The dive escape tactic that German bomber killers relied on no longer works reliably against P-38 escorts. Stigler lands sobered, telling the others the escort problem has become unsolvable with current aircraft. We can still damage bombers, but escaping afterward is much harder. Loss rates will continue climbing. January 10, 1944. The three aces compile their findings, not into a formal technical report, that is not their skill set, but into an operational assessment written in fighter pilot language, describing what matters to combat pilots, energy management, tactical options, engagement geometry, wind conditions. Raoul writes the tactical assessment, the P-38. Lightning's primary advantage is not speed alone, but energy management across the entire engagement envelope. The aircraft accelerates rapidly and dives, reaching speeds of 480 miles per hour, where BF 109s reach 450 miles per hour maximum. This 30 miles per hour advantage means P-38s can open range and escape from disadvantaged positions. The P-38's zoom climb after diving attacks allows recovery of altitude more efficiently than German fighters, minimizing the energy cost of each attack. Net result: P-38 pilots can engage, attack, and reset repeatedly, while German pilots must spend progressively more energy to maintain engagement. The tactical implication is profound. German fighters can no longer force combat against unwilling opponents. Traditional fighter tactics assume both sides must engage once contact is made. The P-38's energy advantages allow disengagement at will. American pilots are trained to use this advantage. If engaged from disadvantage, dive away. If damaged, dive away. If outnumbered, dive away. If low on fuel, dive away. The tactic is simple, reliable, almost foolproof. German pilots cannot counter it effectively. The only successful engagements against P-38s occur when German fighters achieve surprise attack with massive altitude advantage, allowing them to build sufficient energy advantage that P-38s cannot escape even with superior dive performance. Or P-38 pilots make errors turning to fight when they should dive, not recognizing the threat until too late, becoming separated from formations. OR overwhelming numerical advantage allows some German fighters to engage while others position to intercept. Escape routes. These conditions are rare in combat. Most engagements allow P-38s to dictate terms. German pilots are reduced to reactive roles, attempting interceptions, hoping for favorable conditions, accepting that most engagements end with Americans escaping unharmed. Recommendations: abandon traditional fighter tactics emphasizing turning combat against. P-38s emphasize engagement only from massive altitude advantage 5,000 feet. Except that most P-38 encounters will not result in kills. Focus fighter resources on easier targets, bombers. Other escort types train pilots explicitly on energy management and how to recognize unwinnable tactical situations. Request aircraft development prioritizing speed and energy performance over maneuverability. Lipfort contributes a blunt assessment from the perspective of an aggressive fighter pilot whose instincts are being proven obsolete. For 3 years, I have won engagements through superior maneuvering, better positioning, and aggressive tactics. These skills are now insufficient against opponents who refuse to maneuver, who ignore positioning, who counter aggression with disengagement. The P-38 has rendered traditional fighter combat obsolete not through superior dogfighting capability, but by making dogfighting optional. This is psychologically difficult for experienced pilots to accept. We have spent years mastering skills that no longer determine outcomes. Young pilots with 50 hours of training in P-38s are escaping from experienced aces with 200 victories, not through better skill, but through better aircraft and proper tactical doctrine. This feels wrong. It feels like cheating. But it is simply evolution of aerial warfare. The side that recognizes this faster will win. Currently, Americans recognize it. We do not. The brutal truth. German fighter superiority, built on pilot skill and tactical doctrine developed 1939 to 1942, has been defeated by American engineering, an updated doctrine emphasizing energy fighting. We can maintain superiority only against opponents flying older aircraft. Russian fighters on Eastern Front. Older British fighters are against opponents making tactical errors. Against competent opponents flying modern American aircraft P-38, P-47, P-51, German fighter tactics are inadequate. This is not defeatism. This is operational reality. Acknowledging reality is the first step to developing counters. Denying reality ensures continued failures. Stigler contributes bomber interception perspective. P-38 escorts have made bomber interception extremely costly. Previously, German fighters could attack bombers, then dive away faster than escorts. P-38s and P-47s match our dive speed, following attacks, remaining in firing range. Escape success rate has declined from approximately 80% early 1943 to approximately 50% late 1943. Loss rates have doubled. The problem compounds. We need multiple attacks to destroy heavy bombers B-17, B-24, but each attack exposes us to escort fighters. With older escorts Spitfire P-39, we could typically complete 2 to 3 attacks and escape. With P-38, P-47 escorts, completing even one attack and escaping is uncertain. Bomber formations with heavy P-38 escorts should be avoided unless conditions are overwhelmingly favorable. Massive numerical advantage, major altitude advantage, escort distracted or separated. This means American daylight bombing campaign cannot be stopped with current German fighter capabilities. We can inflict casualties, we can shoot down some bombers, but we cannot prevent missions from reaching targets. The strategic bombing campaign will continue and intensify. German industry will be progressively destroyed from the air. This is unacceptable strategically but unavoidable tactically with current resources. The 3 assessments are combined into a 23-page document, short by official report standards but dense with tactical observations and brutal honesty. The report is dated January 12, 1944, classified Geheim Secret, and forwarded through operational channels to General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, General of the Fighter Arm. It reaches Galland's office on January 15th. Galland reads it immediately. He knows Raoul Lipfert and Stigler personally, respects their judgment, values their combat experience. The report confirms what Galland has suspected from casualty statistics and mission reports. German fighter tactics developed early in the war are becoming obsolete against new American fighters employing energy fighting doctrine. He calls a meeting for January 18th with senior fighter commanders to discuss the implications. The meeting occurs at Luftwaffe High Command in Berlin, in a conference room that shows strain from sustained bombing. Repaired plaster, replaced windows, the smell of fresh paint covering bomb damage. 12 officers attend, all experienced fighter leaders, collectively representing over 1,500 confirmed victories and decades of combat experience. Galland opens by reading selected passages from the P-38 evaluation. The room is silent as he reads. These men know Raoul Lipfert and Stigler. If these 3 aces say German tactics are failing, then German tactics are failing. When Galland finishes, he asks for responses. Oberst Johann Steinhoff, a veteran commander, speaks first. The report is accurate. I have observed these tactical patterns throughout autumn 1943. American fighters, especially P-38s and P-47s, disengage from unfavorable combats routinely. Our pilots report frustration at achieving perfect position but scoring no kills. The Americans have learned not to fight our strengths. This is sound doctrine on their part. We must adapt or accept continued attrition. Another officer, Oberst Walter Osso, pushes back. Adaptation requires new aircraft. We cannot change physics. The Bf-109 and FW-190 cannot match American dive acceleration or high-altitude speed. Tactical changes alone are insufficient. We need the Me-262 jet operational in large numbers. Until then, we fight with disadvantages no amount of skill overcomes. The discussion continues for 2 hours. Experienced combat leaders wrestling with uncomfortable reality. German fighters, which dominated early war air combat, are no longer dominant. American aircraft P-38, P-47, P-51 are superior in the energy fighting regime that characterizes high-altitude combat over Germany. German pilots are skilled, experienced, motivated, but skill cannot overcome systematic performance disadvantages. The jet fighter Me-262 could restore German advantage, but production is plagued by delays, resource shortages, and bombing disruption. The jet will not enter service in meaningful numbers until late 1944, at earliest, perhaps too late to affect the war's outcome. Galland closes the meeting by ordering the P-38 evaluation distributed to all fighter units as required reading for pilots and commanders. He mandates immediate revision of fighter tactics instruction, emphasizing energy management, engagement discipline, recognizing unwinnable situations. He requests accelerated Me-262 production from the Aviation Ministry, knowing the request will likely be denied or delayed. He does everything within his authority to respond to the threat the P-38 evaluation documented. But he knows, and the officers in the meeting know, that tactical adjustments are insufficient when the enemy has systematic performance advantages. The Luftwaffe can adapt, can fight smarter, can train better, but it cannot overcome the fundamental reality that American fighters are simply more capable. In the flight regimes where the air war is fought, the report spreads through fighter units over the following weeks. Pilots read it with mixed reactions. Experienced pilots recognize the tactical patterns described, nod in agreement. feel validated that their frustrations are being acknowledged at the command level. Younger pilots, still influenced by propaganda about German invincibility, struggle to accept that their aircraft are inferior, that their training is inadequate, that victory is no longer likely. Squadron commanders use the report as teaching material, conducting briefings on energy fighting, engagement discipline, survival tactics. The Luftwaffe, slowly and incompletely, begins adapting to the new tactical reality. But adaptation cannot restore parity. It can only minimize losses and extend the timeline before inevitable defeat. The captured P-38 continues flying at Rechlin through February and March 1944, with additional pilots given familiarization flights to experience American capabilities firsthand. In April, during an Allied bombing raid on Rechlin, the P-38 is destroyed on the ground by bomb blast, the airframe shattered, both engines torn from their mounts, the aircraft rendered unrepairable. The wreckage is bulldozed into a pit and buried. But the lessons learned from the P-38 evaluation live on in revised tactics manuals, in pilot briefings, in the institutional knowledge of the Luftwaffe fighter force. Those lessons could not prevent defeat, but they saved some lives, helped some pilots survive encounters they would have lost using outdated tactics, provided honest assessment of operational reality in an organization increasingly dominated by propaganda and denial. Post-war, the 3 pilots who evaluated the P-38 survive and reflect on what they learned. Gunther Owl survives the war with 275 confirmed victories, becomes a successful businessman. Later serves in the post-war German Air Force, retires as a general. In a 1980 interview, he says, "The P-38 evaluation taught me that aerial combat had evolved beyond pure dogfighting to energy management. The Americans understood this transition earlier than we did. They built aircraft and developed tactics for energy fighting while we remained focused on traditional maneuvering combat. That lag in doctrinal understanding cost us dearly. By the time we recognized the change, American aircraft production and pilot training had created overwhelming advantages we could not overcome. The P-38 was not the best American fighter. The P-51 was arguably better, but it was the first American fighter that made me realize we were fighting obsolete battles with obsolete tactics." Helmut Lipfert survives with 203 victories, returns to civilian life, works in various industries, remains bitter about the war's outcome until his death in 1990. In a 1985 memoir, he writes, "Flying the P-38 was humbling. I was one of Germany's best fighter pilots, yet that aircraft made me feel inadequate. Not because I could not fly well, I could, but because I understood that American pilots of moderate skill in P-38s could defeat me through aircraft advantages, rather than piloting skill. This reality contradicted everything I believed about fighter combat. I believed skill determined outcomes. The P-38 proved performance determines outcomes when performance advantages are sufficiently large. That lesson has stayed with me for 40 years. Franz Stigler survives with 28 victories, becomes famous post-war for his decision not to shoot down a damaged B-17. The Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler incident, emigrates to Canada, works as a businessman. In a 1995 interview, he reflects, "The P-38 evaluation showed me that the strategic bombing campaign could not be stopped with our fighters and tactics. The Americans had aircraft capable of escorting bombers throughout Germany, with performance adequate to defeat our interceptors. Once I understood this, I knew Germany would lose the air war. That certainty affected my combat decisions afterward. Knowing the war was lost made me question orders requiring suicidal attacks on heavily defended bombers. I still flew missions, still fought, but with growing recognition that we were delaying the inevitable rather than changing the outcome. The P-38, Lightning, the aircraft that frustrated German aces and forced tactical re-evaluation, served with distinction throughout the war. Over 10,000 were produced operating in every theater. The P-38 achieved greatest success in the Pacific, where its range and twin-engine reliability were critical. In Europe, the P-38 was eventually supplemented and partially replaced by the P-51 Mustang, which had better high-altitude performance and longer range. But the P-38's impact on German fighter tactics was lasting. It was the first American fighter that comprehensively demonstrated energy fighting advantages, forcing German pilots to recognize that traditional maneuvering tactics were obsolete against opponents who could disengage at will through superior speed and dive performance. The broader lesson of the P-38 evaluation is about how warfare evolves and how organizations adapt or fail to adapt to changing conditions. German fighter tactics, developed 1939 to 1942, emphasized close-in maneuvering combat where pilot skill was decisive. These tactics succeeded against early war Allied fighters with comparable or inferior performance. But as Allied aircraft improved, especially American fighters designed from the start for high altitude, High-speed operations German tactics became progressively less effective. The Americans didn't fight German strengths. They used their aircraft's advantages, speed, energy retention, dive performance, to dictate engagement terms. German pilots could still win fights if Americans chose to turn and dogfight, but Americans increasingly chose not to, and German pilots couldn't force them to. This dynamic superior tactics rendered irrelevant by refusal to engage on advantageous terms recurs throughout military history. Technology changes warfare, doctrine adapts. Organizations that recognize changes faster gain advantages. The P-38 evaluation forced some German pilots and commanders to recognize that their doctrine was obsolete. But recognition alone couldn't restore German advantages. That required new aircraft, the Me-262 jet, which came too late in insufficient numbers. By the time Germany fielded jets with performance superior to any Allied piston fighter, American numerical superiority was so overwhelming that even superior aircraft couldn't affect outcomes. The three aces who evaluated the P-38 understood this trajectory clearly. They recognized their expertise was being devalued by technological change, that years of accumulated skill mattered less than aircraft performance margins, that the war they had trained for was not the war being fought in 1944. Their honest assessment, documented in the January 1944 report, traveled through Luftwaffe command channels, was read by leaders who could not act on it effectively, and ultimately joined the vast collection of accurate intelligence that Germany possessed but could not exploit. The tragedy was not lack of understanding. The tragedy was that understanding came too late, when resources to respond effectively no longer existed. The P-38 evaluation revealed how aircraft performance in specific regimes, energy fighting, dive acceleration, high-speed handling, could negate tactical expertise and render traditional fighter doctrine obsolete. The German aces understood this after flying the P-38, but understanding without resources to respond is just another form of defeat. If you want more stories about how tactical evolution and technological change shaped World War II's air war, subscribe now. We publish these combat pilot perspectives every week. Thanks for watching.